Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I'm David Lamb. I'm the director of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Very happy that you could join us today for the next installment of our ISR Insight speaker series. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ISR, we have over 300 affiliated faculty drawn from over 20 academic disciplines and almost every unit at the University of Michigan. ISR serves as a hub for rigorous social science research across a wide range of topics, including wealth and inequality, race and racism, politics and public opinion, teen drug use, economic behavior, aging and health, and much more. The goal of this ISR Insight speaker series is to create a forum for disseminating research findings of our faculty at ISR. A few housekeeping notes. Please note that Zoom offers a live transcription of this meeting. You can enable this by clicking the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. The chat feature, you'll notice, is disabled for this event, but I invite you to send in any questions you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. You can send them at any time and we'll do our best to answer them before our time runs out. I should note that recordings of all of our Excellent Insight series are posted on our website, isr.umich.edu, along with information about our upcoming talks. So please check there and follow ISR on Twitter at UMISR to stay connected. Turning to today's talk, we've got a wonderful event. We're celebrating the life and legacy of James Jackson, who passed away in September of 2020. James was an absolute giant in the social sciences, producing a steady stream of path-breaking research and training generations of social science researchers. He pioneered the National Survey of Black Americans, which began in ISR in 1977, and founded the Program for Research on Black Americans, PRBA, at ISR in 1976. PRBA has been an important center for research and training, producing a leading group of scholars all over the country. James's study of Black communities contributed a host of insights into family composition, education, health status and outcomes, aging, violence in community, religious and spirituality practices, help giving and help seeking behaviors, law enforcement and policing, and experiences with racism. He reframed the discourse on people of African descent, giving Black people a voice on Black mental health. Today I have the pleasure of introducing a very distinguished panel of researchers who work closely with James, and they'll lead us in the discussion of this important body of work. Robert Joseph Taylor is the Harold Johnson Endowed Professor of Social Work, Director of the Program for Research on Black Americans at ISR. His research is on family support networks and religious participation among African Americans. He worked with James as a graduate student, postdoc, and faculty member since 1977. Belinda Tucker is Professor Emerita of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA and Vice Provost Emerita of UCLA's Institute for American Cultures. She was James' first dissertation student and was co-PI with Jerry Gurin on James' groundbreaking National Survey of Black Americans. Our third panelist is Philip Jess Bowman. Phil is professor in the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education and faculty associate with the Program for Research on Black Americans in ISR. As a social psychologist, Phil's research focuses on strengths-based issues in higher education, African American studies, and public policy. He worked closely with James from his arrival at UM in 1972 to 2020 as a PhD student, as an ISR research scientist, professor in psychology and African American studies and higher education, as well as founding director of the National Center for Institutional Diversity. So it's an incredible group we've got today. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and I'm going to turn things over to Robert. Thank you all for coming.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. If you could just wait for a second. And my goal today is to spend a few minutes giving a brief history of some of the many accomplishments of James Jackson. So here's a brief outline of the things I'm going to cover. And again, I'm going to ask you as I go along to read some of the material just to save time. Um, I took a look at one of James' most recent bio sketches, and he mentioned 4 or 5 major accomplishments, and I'm going to follow some of those today. So number one is the National Survey of Black Americans, and as you see, James is the PI, Belinda Tucker and Phil Bowman are co-PIs, along with Gerald Gurin, who was one of the founders of ISR. Other major study is the National Black Election Survey, and this is one of the major books that came out of that series of surveys, written by Pat Gurin, Shirley Hatchett, and James Jackson. Number 3 is the National Survey of American Life, which is still very active. As of yesterday, we had 514 articles from that data set. Again, this is a single cross-section data set. 54 papers solely on adolescence and 75 dissertations. This is a picture of James Jackson and Ellis Monk. I'm showing this picture because Ellis is one of the people that his dissertation is based on, the NSAL. And he and James really hit it off well because they are both from the city of Inkster, Michigan. And Ellis is at Harvard now. Of course, anytime you mention James' accomplishments in terms of ISR, you have to mention his grant, infrastructure grant that expanded the research capacity of ISR. Another study that James mentioned, and I shouldn't call it a study, I should say a grant, is the Michigan Center for Urban African American Aging Research. And these are activities that take place in Detroit, where we do a lot of work with Detroit Black elders. And what's interesting about if the middle picture is the man that's serving was at that time our National Institute on Aging project director. James, in the last 10 years, developed a very sophisticated theoretical model. And he did this work with Brianna Metsup, and that model is called the Fortness model that looks at the cost of African Americans' physical health that benefits their mental health. Other thing to mention is James's diversity initiatives. And again, James has done so much, it's really difficult, if not impossible, for me to mention all of it, but I'll mention some of these. So as an associate dean at Rackham, he increased participation of minority students in the ICPSR summer program with the help of Jim Duderstadt, president at the time. He substantially increased the number of minority PhD students. As director of CAS, when it was a center, now it's a department. This is a Center for African American and African Studies. He substantially increased the number of Black faculty that were associated with that center, and he created summer workshops on the quantitative study of various African countries. But the main thing with James, and I would argue his main contribution out of the many, is his mentoring and the results of his mentoring. And I'm gonna go through the bulk of the rest of the presentation will be on his mentoring. So in 1976, he created the Program for Research on Black Americans, and it has substantially increased the number of African American scholars. So it's impossible for me to cover all of the people that James has mentored. And it's also impossible for me to even know indirectly. However, my goal is to share a good portion of those. So the Program for Research on Black Americans has had an interdisciplinary focus, looking at having students and faculty from all these various areas. And here's one indicator of the influence of the Program for Research on Black Americans. So this is a study that was in the 2020 article in the journal PLOS One, and it looked at the citations of the top 100,000, or I should say 2% cited scientists across all fields in the world. And what you see is 6 of them are associated with PRBA. So David Williams, Vicki Mays, James Jackson, of course, Linda Chatters, Harold Woody Neighbors, and of course, and Robert Taylor. Some people also may not know that through James and his mentoring, that we as a group have become pioneers in African American gerontology. And this, there's 2 or 3 articles that sort of state this. Rose Gibson in particular was the editor of the Gerontologist, and she remains the only African American editor of any major gerontology journal. It's also through James, there's been a tremendous impact in the field of social work. This is a study looked at citations of African American faculty in social work. And of the top 20, 6 of them are either PRBA faculty or former students. These are pictures of 3 of them. This is Karen Lincoln, who's at USC. Trina Shanks, who's here at Michigan, and Sean Joe at Wash U in St. Louis. And these are accomplishments of the graduate students who worked with the National Survey of Black Americans. And again, if you remember, that was done in the late 70s, early 80s. And what you see is this is, as a group, a pretty accomplished group. And the ones who are highlighted in red all became full professors here at the University of Michigan. They all started as students here. In terms of achievements at the University of Michigan, and this is really quite notable, the only African-American woman full professors in the history of the School of Public Health and the history of the School of Social Work here at the University of Michigan, all have had some level of Program for Research on Black Americans training. We've also had a leadership in terms of historically Black colleges and universities. Kendrick Brown is now Provost of Morehouse. Ruby Beal is Chairperson of Business Administration at Hampton. There's also a strong impact of former PRBA students and postdocs in governmental service. Nicholas Jones is currently at the Census Bureau. Lieutenant Commander Rashid Njai is at the CDC, and it's obviously busy work now with the pandemic, and it also was heavily involved with the Ebola crisis. Anna Rowley is at the Center for Scientific Review. And now I'm gonna move on to some leadership positions of alumni in higher education. And again, these are, just take a look at some of the names of people. These are some selected PRBA alumni. And I'm gonna just show some pictures of some of the people. Prudence Carter is the Dean of the School of Education at Berkeley. Jackie Matisse, Dean of Faculty at Rutgers. Thomas Levis, Dean of Public Health at Tulane. Walter Johnson, Deputy Dean for Curriculum in the School of Social Work at the University of Chicago. Daphne Watkins here at the University of Michigan, and she's director of the Vivian and Curtis and James L. Curtis Center in the School of Social Work. Vicki Mays, who's at UCLA. David Williams, who's at, again, between Vicki and many people know, and David is currently at Harvard. Derek Hamilton, who's at NYU, and is very active. It's one of our public intellectuals. These are a few other selected PRBA alumni. So I started earlier, I talked about the Michigan Center for Urban African American Asian Research, and I mentioned our role in terms of doing community-based programs in Detroit with African American seniors. But it also has a major role in terms of mentoring. So over the first four, it's in its 23rd year, so over the first 20 years, there were 54 tenure track faculty who were mentored. Of that group, 18 of that 54 full professors, 38 currently have tenure. These are some of the people. This is Derek, who's at Georgetown. Jackie, who's a professor in nursing at Columbia. Karen Charles, Dean of School of Management at Yale. Anna Marie, who's a dean at Gonzaga. Ruben Miller, University of Chicago. Ruben is an assistant professor, and he has a very well-respected book on re-entry from incarceration that was first study, part of this was funded by Muckwar. These are some of our recent recipients of K Awards, and they got these within the last 2 years. We also have a vigorous training program for assistant professors and doctoral students. These are some pictures from our training programs. This is again from the 2016. This is from the 2018. This is a training program that's headed by Brianna Metzuk, but Jack James, Cleopatra Caldwell, and I are co-investigators on this grant and this program. And as you tell, this is 2020, this is a virtual meeting. We also have, this is pre-pandemic, we also have other mentoring groups. This is from our mentoring group. This is January of 2020. And this is from the same meeting. And I just want to share a few pictures of some of our young scholars. Rihanna Anderson, who's here at Michigan in public health. Ann Gwynn at Case Western. Mosi Infantucci at Wisconsin. Stephanie Cook at NYU. Fantasy Lozada at Virginia Commonwealth. Christina Cross at Harvard. Bernadine Waller, who's just about to finish her dissertation, is headed to a postdoc at Columbia. Lauren Brown, who was probably arguably James's last mentee, who worked with him starting last summer. We're one of the few groups, research groups, that really stays in contact with each other. And this is a picture from our 2014 reunion. This is a picture of our 40th reunion, which is done in 2016. And lastly, what I'd like to mention is here's a video of an interview with James. If you go to YouTube and you type in Program for Research on Black Americans, and then add in PRBA, you will find this and many other videos. So again, I'd like to end just by mentioning that based upon James's mentoring and the number of students, both older students like me, former students like me, and young students, his legacy will continue.
All right. Thank you, David, and thank you, Robert, for that very, very revealing overview. I truly appreciate this opportunity to pay tribute to James's enormous impact on all of our lives, our professions, and clearly society at large. His drive to accomplish, to explore new ground, to generate new data, and to solve societal ills was both legendary and inspiring. So I'd like to spend my few minutes exploring events and experiences that I think may have nurtured that drive, the drive that shaped his journey. And I don't have any visuals, but I so wish that someone had taken photos of some of the events I'm going to describe. So you'll just have to imagine them. I did have some rich sources of information though. Of course, our firsthand experiences with James, James's own words in a very personal and revealing interview that he did with Alan Kraut of the Association of Psychological Science, fittingly, in the south of France in 2014. Information I gleaned from James's dear friend and fellow psychologist, A.J. Franklin, an exhaustive, insightful review of the history of African-American psychology that was written by Bertha Garrett Holliday, who was with APA at the time, and a memorial I found for Gary Simpkins, who was the first president of the Black Student Psychological Association, we refer to as BSPA, of which James was one of the founders. Now, I entered the University of Michigan social psychology program in the fall of 1971 at exactly the same moment that James became the psychology department's first regular African-American faculty member. So out of perhaps, he estimated 170 regular full-time faculty member, James was the first and only Black professor. In fact, between 1920 and 1966, Michigan had only awarded 3 PhDs to Blacks in psychology. James came straight out of graduate school at Wayne State University to Michigan, so he was really just a few years older than we were, and likely even younger than some of the people in our cohort. He was 27, think about that, and liked to party and have fun like the rest of us, which was enormously meaningful because it made our goals so much more realistic. If he could do it, somebody who seemed to be just like us, so could we. And I might note here that James was a Michigander through and through. He was born and raised in Inkster. He did his undergraduate studies at Michigan State. Now, when he did leave the state to study for a master's degree at the University of Toledo, he fortuitously met his soulmate, Professor Toni Antonucci, who was an academic rock star in her own right. That dedication to the state of Michigan, particularly the Detroit adjacent South, kind of a muscular working class family and home centric area, signaled to me a groundedness in the common man/woman that may have been belied if he had taken flight to one of the Ivies. Given the times, our formative years were deeply framed by what we now refer to as the civil rights era. James came into manhood at the very moment when this society was being challenged by Blacks in particular to reckon with the awful and deep racism that permeated every aspect of our lives. He came of age at a time when not just everyday folks, but even our leaders were being shot dead in the streets. Edgar Epps, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Bobby Kennedy, and even the nation's president, John Kennedy, were all murdered during the 1960s, our maturational years. The student movements, both anti-racism and anti-war, were vigorous, large, urgent, earnest. We thought we were going to change the world. By the time I entered graduate school at Michigan, I had faced on more than one occasion during my years in Chicago, rifles with fixed bayonets on the end. And I was not a diehard revolutionary, just an ordinary student. So times, as often described, were turbulent. And in what even the American Psychological Association references as a key event in the development of psychology as a discipline, that is, if you go to their website, you'll see listed in 1969, this key event in 69, James joined other members of the newly formed Black Student Psychological Association in taking over the presidential address session at the 1969 American Psychological Association Convention. George Miller was president, and the convention's theme that year was psychology and the problems of society. So it seemed the perfect moment to engineer this takeover. In the interview that James did with Alan Kraut, he described the moment as follows. This is James talking. There must have been about 17 of us from across the country. We all put on our dashikis and marched up there and took over the microphone. We didn't do this lightly. We all thought we were going to jail. But George Miller and George Albee, particularly Albee, and a social psychologist from Harvard, Herb Kelman, decided they would handle this in a very different way. They told us, well, some of your points are well taken. Let's have a meeting tomorrow morning and talk about it and see what we can do. And I so wish I had a photo of that moment. For the uninitiated, a dashiki was an African print shirt that was very, very popular in the day. The next day, BSBA President Gary Simpkins presented their 5-point plan to the APA Council. Now, Bertha Holliday detailed the consequences of that meeting and similar demands made the year before by the also recently formed Association of Black Psychologists, what we refer to as ABPSI. So the following year, the APA established the Commission for Accelerating Black Participation in Psychology, and it included representatives of BSPA, ABPSI, and APA. All graduate programs in psychology were given ABPSI's 10-point program for increasing the representation of Blacks in psychology, and 35 programs across the nation agreed to immediate implementation. So what could have led to the derailment of some careers, because the moment when psychology, it became the moment rather, when psychology really decided to do something different. A fairly recent article in 2019, where Alexandra Rutherford actually revisited that moment, noted that it forced the APA to confront psychology's history of culturally biased testing practices, the lack of employment opportunities for African-American psychologists, and the inadequate recruitment and support of Black grad students. I, and the many Black and other students of color who entered psych grad programs after that time, are direct beneficiaries of that moment, that takeover in 1969 and their actions. So fittingly and presciently, James was the director of research and development for the BSBA at the time of the confrontation, and he actually became the president the following year when the work of implementation began in earnest. When he completed his degree, he became president of ABPSI, still in his 20s. Imagine that, still in his 20s. So James was as responsible as anyone for the tectonic changes of our discipline, driven also from within, particularly the efforts of Pat and Jerry Gorham. Michigan substantially increased the number of students of color in the psych department. So James entered Michigan with a newly diversified group of students to work with, all well steeped in social activism, committed to work for social change, and deeply, deeply concerned about issues of race and ethnicity, and therefore perfectly suited to engage with James's transformative notions and projects. So James learned at an early age that he had real and meaningful agency. The enormously gratifying results from his and his colleagues' change efforts produced results that both enriched his career and dramatically reshaped the character of psychology as a discipline, as well as its workforce. Now, some of you also likely know that James had what he termed defining encounters with some of the most consequential people who have ever walked the face of this earth. People who demanded change and accountability and who inspired and led others. So James spoke of having very meaningful conversations with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Jesse Jackson, and even Jimmy Hoffa. So for those who are unfamiliar, Hoffa presided for many years over the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a very formidable labor union, but disappeared in 1975, most likely murdered by the mafia. But let's just say he also got things done. So James learned a few things over the years. Just a few years later, James proposed the idea of doing a national survey of Black Americans based on probability sampling. Now, this had never been done before, and James was greatly influenced by the first mental health survey of the entire US population done in the 50s, the late 50s. Americans View Their Mental Health, which was conceived and conducted by Jerry Gurin, Joe Viroff, and Sheila Feld. Now, I was present when James took this idea before the leaders of ISR, and somewhere around 1976, I think. Now, recall that James was still a very young man, perhaps in his early 30s, proposing an idea that many in that audience viewed as heresy. You can't do a study focused solely on Black people, they said. You need a white control group. The pushback was immediate and visceral and widely shared. Who was this young upstart to upend appropriate social science methodology, as defined by those who controlled the field at the time? And I think that James was a bit taken aback by the response. But those earlier experiences and successes, in my view, provided fortification in such moments. James moved forward undaunted, and the rest is, shall we say, history. We completed the proposal, James's PI, Jerry and his co-PIs, and we celebrated the submission at midnight with a shared Apple Mountain dessert at the Cottage Inn, one of Jerry's favorite memories. But what is most notable about this initiative is that James learned early in life, during his student years, the value of youthful agency. Student participation during every part of the process was central, desirable, and profitable. It set the stage for the magnificent training programs that emerged from that program that Robert so elegantly described, and in the process transformed the very nature of the psychological workforce, and we would argue the workforces of many affiliated fields. And as my colleagues are also detailing, James's commitment to training, student agency, unequivocal and uncompromised support, and this is key, unbridled optimism that perhaps stemmed from his own youthful success, all in the generation of critical knowledge, was the foundation of the Jacksonian model of research and mentorship that we all of his students, his mentees, attempt to replicate, and that will endure long past our own lifetimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, Dr. Bowman.
Okay, hello everyone. Belinda has provided a wonderful and eloquent historical and social context within which James S. Jackson became a visionary, a mentor, a trailblazer, and a transformative leader. And my brief comments today, I'd like to highlight, given this theme of James as a visionary, a mentor, a trailblazer, and a transformative leader, I'd like to briefly highlight several major areas. And I have about 5 slides or so that I'll use as a context with a emphasis on a set of pictures, followed by a few bullets that I'll make some comments about. As indicated in these pictures, in some ways I think pictures, the old saying goes, speaks volumes more than 1,000 words. And I'll try to let the pictures do most of the speaking, and then I will highlight with the related bullets. As a visionary, mentor, trailblazer, and transformative leader, between 1972, he, as Belinda mentioned, he transitioned into Michigan during 71, but he had to get his own dissertation done. And in some ways, his official work as a newly minted assistant professor and early precursors for the program for research or the National Survey of Black Americans, and ultimately the Program for Research on Black Americans occurred during this roughly 48, 49-year period. And I'd like to kind of highlight these kind of brief highlights of these 5 major themes, from the National Survey of Black Americans to PRBA from 1972 to 1980, his impact on psychology, and his major transformative impact on the field, especially with a focus on African Americans, with a shift from the historical and conventional focus on Black deficits among African Americans, with the comparative view of comparing Blacks with whites and raising the question about what's wrong with Blacks, or looking at Black deficits. James truly was a major force in transforming that to a focus on Black strengths throughout his career. Secondly, he had a major impact on the social science, in social science in general, and African American studies in that broader context. He also had major impact on public health and related professions, and in the area of race and public policy at the University of Michigan at the national and global level. The next slide focuses particularly on his impact with the National Survey of Black Americans to the Program for Research on Black Americans from his entry in 1971 and his transformative work between 72 and 1980, that roughly 8 to 9 year period. Certainly, James' work as a visionary, as a mentor, as a trailblazer, as a transformative leader, took place within the context of ISR and a leadership team. And I think these pictures here kind of highlight that. At the top, he had major support within ISR from, as Robert mentioned, the Gurins, both Jerry Gurin, who had been a long-term pioneer in the area of national surveys, having conducted Americans' View of Mental Health in 1957, which was a major foundation for decades hence the idea of doing a national probability sample of African Americans and doing the first national survey of Black Americans, of which James ended up spearheading and stewarding. And Bob Zients was always a major support for James in the Research Center for Group Dynamics. And Tom Jester at the time was the Institute for Social Research director. And Bob Kahn and Dan Katz, and I had the honor personally of working very closely with all of these really profound pioneers within ISR, and they provided profound support for James, from the time he entered in 71 and throughout their lifetimes. And the last picture to the right is of Edgar Epps. Edgar Epps was at the University of Michigan at the Institute for Social Research for the decade prior to James' arrival. And in some ways, I think we need to really look at the work he did at ISR with not much support, but I think it provided some foundations for James coming in and really doing his trailblazing work after that time. In the middle, you have the the NSBA study directors, Belinda Tucker, who so eloquently provided a wonderful historical and social context within which James Jackson did this trailblazing work. And I, had the distinct honor of working with James. I actually came into the University of Michigan in 1970, and I think Belinda came in the following year. It also is important to mention Shirley Hatchett, who was actually at Michigan. Shirley came in 1970 also, because she was in sociology in 1970. So we all, Belinda, myself, and Shirley, were all, early kind of study directors, if you will, within the National Survey of Black Americans. And then Letha Tradiha was a research associate in those early years. as kind of study directors, there's a brief pictorial of the first national survey of Black Americans, of which Belinda will probably break out in highs when she look at it, when she look at that survey, because that survey carries lots of memories. I think I stayed up all night, one night, drawing boxes for some of the respondents. We didn't have the technology that people have today. And then the one of the early publications, Life in Black America, that James did to kind of highlight that original National Survey of Black Americans. And then, as Belinda said, this story would certainly not be possible to tell without the profound role of the graduate students. And that first cohort of graduate students here included Harold Neighbors, Wayne McCullough, Linda Chatters, Robert Sellers, Ron Brown, Cleopatra Howard, and Debbie Robinson, who's currently at James brought back to ISR within the last couple of years to try to extend some of the work at both the national and the international level. Next slide. His impact in psychology is profound. Here, there was a Black Student Psychological Association reunion, which is depicted in a pictorial representation done by Harold Fairchild, done in September of 2012, and that was an interesting reflection on James' legacy in Black psychology. James really was one of the founding visionaries of what we now call Black psychology, and also the Black Student Psychological Association and the Association for Black Psychologists. As Belinda mentioned, James was an early leader in both, and had served as a president of both during those early stages. And in the broader field of psychology, James was also a major leader in the American Psychological Association, and as depicted in this keynote address in the middle, was very, very much a major leader in the Association for Psychological Science. The field of psychology, James has been a profound visionary and trailblazer and leader from his early days in finishing his PhD at Wayne State and coming to Michigan until 2020. On the right-hand side, his work also in psychology, in the psychology of aging, is pretty much, he's a pioneer in that field. And some of that work was done collaboratively with his beloved wife, Toni Antonucci. And as Robert mentioned, some of this theoretical work provided the kind of foundations for doing translational work in the context of the Michigan Center for Urban African-American Aging Research. The last little pictorial representation on this day in psychology was a recent kind of depiction of James's impact on the field of psychology. And this particular representation was about, James's birth, and that, with James's birth and his kind of profound transformative effect on the field of psychology. Psychology, has been transformed as a field, largely because of James Jackson. Next slide. He's also had a profound impact on social science, more broadly speaking, and African-American studies in particular. So as a visionary, mentor, trailblazer, and transformative leader, James, developed a series of landmark national and international surveys on race and ethnicity, broadly speaking, with certainly that centered on his groundbreaking work on African-American population. He also developed innovative research and training programs in survey methodology, and mentored multiple generations of social scientists, not only in psychology, but also in sociology, in political science, and in economics. And a national leader and the director of the Center for Afro-American and African Studies, or DAS, which celebrated its 50th year anniversary over the last year. And James's leadership there, in the center, having served as one of the directors in bringing quantitative social science research into a field that's largely defined by history and the study of literature. James have transformed in many ways, certainly expanded the purview of African American studies to also include the social sciences. I might just kind of look at this statement that James made in this little pictorial representation to the left. But social science research is often, and I quote, problem focused. The questions tend to start from the perspective of asking, what's wrong with Black people? We approach the issues from a very different perspective. Our question is, given the structural impediments that they face, why do Black people do so well? Very Jacksonian, very profoundly James, the kind of perspective and philosophy and vision that James brought into his work, not only in psychology, but also expanding this perspective within and helping to transform the disciplines of sociology, political science, economics, and also bringing quantitative social research into the purview of Afro-American and African studies at Michigan and nationally. Next slide, please. He also had a profound impact on public health and related professions as a visionary, a mentor, a trailblazer, and a transformative leader. He mentored multiple generations of experts, as Belinda and Robert has highlighted earlier, in public health and related professions, in public health, in medicine, in allied health fields, including nursing, dentistry, pharmacy, in social work, and in urban planning and policy, just to name a few. Not only in the social sciences then did James have an impact, but also in public health in particular, but also related professions. The National Institute for Mental Health gave James the James Jackson Memorial Award recently, which is depicted in the center here in April of 2021. Just very, very recently, they have started the James Jackson Memorial Award in his honor for his profound impact nationally in the area of mental health, both the science and the policy of mental health. He also, as indicated earlier, developed the affordances model of disparities in physical and mental health, of profound scholarly contribution and theoretical contribution in the field of both psychology as well as medicine and health-related fields. He developed innovative research training programs in aging and gerontology, as Robert Taylor also noted earlier. And then finally, his innovative scholarship on Black mental health, aging, and family life are classics in the field. Next slide, please. And finally, James also had a profound impact on policy. James was both in his orientation, his scholarly orientation, focused on translation of scholarship to public policy, the so what. He certainly is indicated in his affordances model that was focused on expanding basic theory. But equally important was the translation of the theory and the scholarship to impact public policy at the University of Michigan, nationally and internationally. James leaves a legacy here as well. He certainly, transformed ISR, the Institute for Social Research, in its world-renowned role in policy relevant social science research. James's tenure as the director of ISR helped to cement much of the work that he had done in his earlier roles in the Research Center for Group Dynamics, as well as working collaboratively with those of us in the Survey Research Center, including myself and Belinda and others. But James S. Jackson Distinguished Career Award for Diversity Scholarship was also recently made in honor of James from the Provost's Office and the National Center for Institutional Diversity at the University of Michigan, and is an annual award given in James's name. James received the first inaugural Distinguished Career Award for Diversity Scholarship, and now subsequently it will be given in his name as the James S. Jackson Distinguished Career Award for Diversity Scholarship. He also, as indicated earlier, was on the National Science Board and was appointed to that distinguished post by President Barack Obama. He also pioneered very innovative methodological issues in quantitative research on race and ethnicity, guided by the seminal work on African Americans, but expanding it to also look at other populations. It's interesting to note historically that the National Survey of Black Americans actually was one of two national studies conducted at ISR that we often tend to forget about, what we used to call the Chicano study, or the National Study of Mexican Origin Populations, headed by Carlos Arce. That study actually went into the field a year before the work that we did on the National Survey of Black Americans under James's leadership. But I think it attests to James's vision and expertise and leadership on methodological issues in quantitative research on race and ethnicity that we were able, to I think build a much deeper and kind of profound foundations for the legacy. Largely, this work continues to the day in the ICPSR, or the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, based at ISR, but consisting of membership from universities throughout the nation and the world. There is an ongoing workshop on methodological issues in quantitative research on race and ethnicity that really builds on James's legacy. Finally, James was an expert consultant in this translational work from the best scholarship on African Americans and race and ethnicity to policy to address pressing higher education, pressing national, and pressing international diversity policy issues. And that picture, I think, in the bottom, this New Directions, African Americans in Diversifying Nations, was a book that James published that focuses on the importance of translating work, good scholarship on African Americans to public policy. The picture in the center is interesting. That's a picture, an older picture taken of James Jackson and John Conyers, the late John Conyers, in the middle, and that's Tom Hilliard to the right, who's very much an expert on African Americans in the criminal justice system. And James worked very closely with such pioneers in those areas. That's a very early picture of James, actually probably taken sometimes in the early 70s. And then to the left, are a couple of the awards or pictures related to a couple of the awards that have begun to emerge at the University of Michigan at both ISR and from the Provost's office. That I'm, very happy, that they are remembering the legacy and profound impact of James' transformative work at the University of Michigan. And then finally, to the far right is a picture of James. This picture could be, taken in a national context. It could be taken in DC at some national forum. It could be you taken in some higher education forum in the state, the nation, or the world. But James's impact as an expert consultant in higher education, at the national, and profound impact he did at the international level is a kind of a foundation, I think, for the future work that I think Robert and Belinda also mentioned. We have people working in government, people working in all levels of public policy who have been mentored and trained and inspired by the work of James Jackson. In closing, I'd like to really make kind of 3 comments. First of all, it has been a career-defining honor for me to have worked closely with James during his trailblazing 48-year career at Michigan from 1972 to 2000. James Jackson was an amazing leader. And I think when I think about James, he led by example. When I just think about a profound force that James represented, he always led with amazing optimism, amazing compassion, and most of all, hard work, by example. James, as the old saying about James Brown, the hardest working man in show business, James Jackson was the hardest working man in the academy. And I think he inspired all of us to work as hard as he did, but he was always, amazing in his energy and in his hard work, but equally amazing in his compassion and his optimism. I think Belinda mentioned during the early days when we were pressing deadlines, James would tell us that the proposal would write itself. That was one of the things I think that sticks out with his optimism. But his optimism carried whoever had the privilege of working closely with him. And then finally, there will never be another James S. Jackson. But ISR, Institute for Social Research, the University of Michigan as a whole, the nation, and the world are all indeed far better places because of James S. Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to go to question and answer now. And I will start. So I have a few questions here, but first, give me a second. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to add. We have several people who sort of said thank you in the Q&A and that they appreciate the things that we have said. Here's one of the questions. Can you tell us more about the role of students in the program of research on Black Americans? And I'll say in particular with working on the National Survey of Black Americans. So, and again, if we could have quick answers, because we are at 2 o'clock right now. So we'll just do like 1 or 2 quick answers.
I'll make a quick comment that builds on one of the pictorial representations that I provided that people can go back and look at later. But, from the start, everything that was done with that national study, as Belinda can attest to, the role of Harold Neighbors, the role of Wayne McCullough, the role of Linda Chatters, the role of Robert Taylor, the role of Ron Brown, the role of Cleopatra Howard, the role of Debbie Robinson, all graduate students. And they had profound impacts on the National Survey of Black Americans. We as study directors, we had certain roles, but the students were central to the enterprise.
And I might add, for example, the help-seeking section was Woody Neighbors' primary responsibility. He had major sole responsibility for that section. So students were
And then,
into
yep,
every portion of that
and by
study.
extension, Belinda, you're absolutely right. And by extension, Ron Brown, you know,
Yes.
the section on political behavior, right?
Right.
In the social support section, you know, equally Robert and Linda, and then you know, working very closely with you, Belinda, and then Wayne had big impacts on identity. Right?
And recall that we had to do everything ourselves because we were, you know, inventing, you know, the process on the spot. So when we pre-tested, you know, down in Birmingham, Alabama, students went with us. We made the questionnaires, constructed them ourselves, packed them in the boxes, shipped them down there, went out on the road, sampled, and gave the interviews. And we could not have been done without the students.
You're absolutely right, because all the interview training, you know, because we had to train all our interviews all over the nation. And that was impossible to do without the central role of a graduate student, not only in the development of the instrument, but also in the training of the national cadre of professional interviewers throughout the nation.
And the students were co-investigators. Now remember, we were all just about the same age. So it was not, you know, the traditionally hierarchical kind of study.
Yes.
Where you
right.
Older people, in those days, guys in charge. We were all young and kind of feeling and making our own way.
I have another question, and this is for David Lamb. So David, is there any consideration of renaming ISR for James Jackson? I know that is a tough question.
Well, I'll jump in. I can. I must say I've loved all of these reflections, and that has a lot to say for it. I'm, you know, it's a complicated question, but I think we all appreciate everything in ISR. Have benefited so much from the contributions that James made. We are kind of out of time. Robert, did you want to get to a couple of more questions?
Yes. Let's see. Here's one. Can you speak to the relationship between ABSI and the founding of other ethnic minority psychology associations? Those of us who belong to those associations also owe a debt to James. So does anybody have any information about that?
There are actually some articles, and maybe I can put them in the chat, that actually discuss those kinds of things. I think A.J. Franklin's article, as well as Bertha Holliday's article, and I'll try to put them in the chat here, actually discuss those things and how, you know, ABSI and BSPA became, you know, the example for many other, every one of the other ethnic-based societal organizations.
And that was especially true in the social behavioral sciences, right?
Yes.
I mean, you think about sociology, political science, or economics. There's no question, you know, that the ABSI, the psychologists, you know, organized associations much earlier than some of those others. The professional fields, you know, I'm less clear on, but certainly the basic social behavioral sciences, psychology, sociology, political science, and economics, in history even, there's no question, you know, that the work that James did in BSPA and in ABSI was the model.
There's a question about, and I'll answer this quickly. Did James ever talk about reparations? And did he weave a case for reparations? And I'm gonna say not that I know of, but I can honestly say that wealth and wealth disparities was one of the things that he did discuss. It's one of the things that you know, students of his and colleagues of his, David Williams in particular, discusses a lot. Trina Shanks discusses that. So a lot of people, and obviously Derek Hamilton. So I'm not sure about James per se, but certainly James's former students and colleagues.
Yes. I don't think James ever made formal statement, but informally, you know, James would always talk very favorably about, you know, a degree to which there was a debt owed to African Americans.
Yeah.
Again, during those stages, it wasn't articulated. You know, John Conyers had done that work. He was very positive, you know, as indicated in that early picture with John Conyers. He's very, very supportive of the work, you know, that John Conyers did, and John Conyers and talked informally in support of it. I don't think he ever in his later professional life, you know, it ever became an issue that he advocated for in a formal way. But informally, he was very supportive of the work that John Conyers had done in that area.
Okay. And so I'm going to state one other thing, and then I'm going to ask one last question for a quick answer. So one question was about the fact that PRBA and James mentored lots of scholars regardless of race. So even though in my presentation I mentioned a lot of Black former students and scholars, certainly there's lots of scholars. You know, we mentioned Brianna Metzik, but there are many others, Shervina Asari, many other people. And especially if you ever took a look at James's dissertation collection, Regular Herzog, as an example, was one of James's students.
Sally Schumacher was one of his very early students.
Yeah.
And from that time on, you know, James, certainly did not restrict his mentoring to just African American or Latino students. For that matter, James had from the early days, from Sally Schumacher on, he had students of all race and ethnicity.
So here's the last question for us. What was the original goal of NSBA in terms of its focus?
As I mentioned, you know, if one looks at it, you had the two studies. People kind of sometimes forget that. You had the Chicano study, the National Survey of the Mexican Origin Population, and then you had the Black study, the National Survey of Black Americans. And both of them had equal essential goals. That is to do national probability samples of the Mexican origin population, of the African American population, in a way that kind of built on mental health study in 1957. Is that what you recall, Belinda?
Right. In fact, though, the first two words in the proposal, the original proposal, were Black identity. So it was developing knowledge related to mental health, because we were going to NIMH for funding, but, you know, an in-depth description of the Black population based on probability sampling that did not exist at that time.
Right. And it is interesting that there was equal proposals within ISR to do the Chicano study and the Black study, or the National Survey of the Mexican Origin Population and the National Survey of Black Americans. But with James's, and I think it really attested James's leadership, the whole legacy of PRBA that grew out. And I don't know that we had, you know, Carlos Arce did a credible job in the Mexican origin population space, but James did a profound job of developing the idea of doing the national probability sample of the African American population.
Right.
So this will be the last comment, and then if anybody wants to say something, but I have a comment here that James also impacted organizational and industrial psychology.
Right.
And that, and this is from Retha Wellens, and that she was also born and raised in Inkster, Michigan. So I think we will end it on that comment. Thank everybody for attending. We had at one point 140 people, so we're really happy that people could make it.
Right.
Again, thank you very much. David, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, thanks everybody. This was absolutely wonderful. Thanks for sharing all those wonderful stories about James, focusing on the contributions of a true friend and mentor to all of us. I wanted to highlight a comment that John Haga made in the Q&A. John's the former director of the National Institute on Aging Division of Behavior and Social Research. He said, I thought I knew about James' accomplishments and admired him so much, but I realized from your presentations I didn't know half. And I'm sure many people out there felt that way today. Really, really wonderful. I just have to say, James was my predecessor as ISR director. Every day I learned more about all the things he did for ISR throughout his career. He had an amazing life and career. His impact on ISR and social sciences is absolutely impossible to overstate. And we all honor his life and his legacy. And I did want to mention one other thing. Before James passed away last September, he worked to launch the James Jackson Emerging Scholars Fund, which provides strategic research and travel grants to postdoctoral candidates and junior faculty in social and behavioral sciences. It's a wonderful fund. We've had many gifts since James's passing. And if anybody's interested in making a gift, you can find the details on the PRBA website. Just go to the PRBA website and look under the giving bar. So if anybody feels inspired and would like to help continue James' legacy and all the incredible training history that James and PRBA and our distinguished panelists today have had, that's one way to do it. So thank you to Robert and Belinda and Phil. That was absolutely fantastic. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll send an email to people with that link to the fund, and hope to see you back for more of these great ISR Insights events. So thanks to our panelists and thanks to everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.